Ladies and gentlemen, there comes a moment in every life when the old has to break for the new to rise. A moment when everything crumbles, not to destroy you, but to make space for something far greater. Today, what you're about to discover is not just motivation. It is the sacred principle, the secret law of new beginnings. It's a divine reset written into the fabric of your existence. Sometimes the most powerful beginnings are hidden within painful endings. It doesn't feel that way in the moment. When you're sitting in the silence after the phone call, that changes everything. When the door you were hoping would open slams shut without explanation. When the person you gave your heart to walks away. These moments don't feel like the start of anything. They feel like the end of you. But that's where the secret begins to unfold. Because the truth is, God often writes his most beautiful stories starting from the ashes. You see, we've been trained to mourn endings as if they are failures. We've been conditioned to believe that when something leaves, something goes wrong. But what if the loss wasn't punishment? What if it was permission? Permission to grow, permission to move, permission to step into the version of yourself that couldn't exist while you were still holding on to what was killing your spirit quietly. We often think holding on is a sign of strength. But sometimes the strongest thing you can do is let go. There's a holy pattern that flows through everything in life. Trees shed their leaves to make room for spring. The caterpillar dissolves into nothing before becoming a butterfly. The seed must die in the soil before it breaks open into new life. These aren't tragedies, they're transformations. And so are you. You weren't meant to stay in one chapter. You weren't created to remain comfortable in a season that has already served its purpose. And yes, it's painful when what you built starts to fall apart. But let this settle into your soul. If something is falling apart, it might be because it was too small for where you're going. You outgrew it. It completed its assignment in your life. That relationship, that job, that version of yourself. And now heaven is whispering, it's time to rise into something higher. But here's where many people get stuck. They confuse the closing of a chapter with the end of their story. They sit in the rubble, trying to glue back pieces of what God has already released them from. You cannot heal by returning to what broke you. You cannot fly while still tied to what once made you crawl. And yet so many refuse to let go, thinking that holding on will preserve their identity, their security, their plan. But what if God's plan is so much greater, so much bigger, that it requires the old to be cleared away? You weren't realigned, you weren't destroyed, you were delivered. What felt like a breakdown was a breakthrough in disguise. And when the smoke clears, when the noise quiets, you'll begin to see it. There was something sacred in the storm. Every divine beginning requires a divine ending. Look through the stories of every world changer, every soul on fire, every person who found their purpose. They all had to walk away from something. Abraham left his homeland. Ruth left her comfort. David left the field. Even Jesus had to leave the crowd. Why? Because destiny is found beyond what is familiar. The path to purpose is paved with surrender. So if you're standing in a place of loss right now, don't curse it. Don't run from it. Sit with it. Listen to what it's trying to teach you. What have you outgrown? What is no longer nourishing your soul? What has become a weight rather than a wing? The moment you dare to release it, really release it, you will feel something unexpected, peace. That peace is the first sign that you've made space for something new to enter. And that's the secret. New beginnings don't start when something new arrives. They start when you finally let go of what has already ended. When you say, I trust what's ahead more than I fear what I'm leaving behind. When you stop trying to resurrect what God has already buried. You're not being punished. You're being positioned. The ending you're grieving is the doorway to a beginning you couldn't have imagined. And when you finally walk through it, you'll look back and say, oh, thank God that ended. Because this is what I was made for, separation. It's one of the hardest things a human heart can endure. To be pulled away from what's familiar, what's comfortable, what you've known for so long. It feels like being ripped in two. And yet, hidden in that pain is a principle, a sacred law written across the journey of every soul that's ever been elevated. Before promotion comes separation. We don't always recognize it at first. It starts subtly. The conversations don't hit the same. The environments you once thrived in start to feel heavy. The people who used to understand you no longer see you. It's not that something is wrong with them. It's that something has shifted inside of you. Growth begins to stretch your spirit, and suddenly the place that once fit you starts to suffocate you. But here's what most people don't see. The discomfort is not the enemy. It's the signal. It's the whisper from above that your season is changing. Because no one can walk into a new destiny while still clinging to an old identity. And that's where the divine tension begins. You're called to go forward, but the past is still trying to hold you back. Think of every great story, every person who stepped into a higher calling. They didn't get there by staying where they were. They had to leave something behind. Abraham had to leave his father's house, not just physically, but emotionally. He had to let go of the known to step into the unknown. Imagine how hard that was, leaving family tradition, the very land he was raised on. But had he stayed, he would have missed the covenant that changed history. There is no elevation without separation. It is the law of beginnings. You cannot be aligned with your future while still entangled with your past. Sometimes God has to isolate you so he can reveal who you really are, without the noise, without the labels, without the expectations placed on you by people who only knew a former version of you. And yes, it feels lonely. You may feel misunderstood, left out, even rejected. But what if that rejection is actually your redirection? It's in those quiet, lonely places that God often speaks the loudest. When you're pulled out of the crowd, you begin to hear true calling. When you're no longer surrounded by distraction, the voice of purpose gets clearer. You realize you were never meant to blend in. You were never meant to settle. You were born for something distinct, something set apart. And to step into that, the first requirement is this: separation. What is this? Separation. But here's the danger. Many people try to bring old connections into new seasons. They try to carry everyone with them, afraid of being alone, afraid of being judged. But the truth is, not everyone is assigned to your destiny. Some people were only meant to walk with you for a chapter, not the whole book. And the longer you hold on to what's expired, the more delayed your arrival becomes. This is why the wilderness always precedes the promised land. You can't take Egypt with you into Canaan. You can't bring slavery mindsets into freedom territory. There has to be a cleansing, a cutting away, a moment where you say, I release what no longer aligns with who I'm becoming. That moment of separation is sacred. It's where the old breaks so the new can be born. You may be in that place right now. Everything feels unfamiliar. The people you used to count on have grown distant. The doors that once opened easily now stay shut. You're walking through what feels like a dry and lonely road. But don't curse the wilderness. Don't rush it. Because even in the wilderness, manna fell from heaven. Even in the desert, water came from a rock. Even when it felt like nothing was growing, God was providing. The separation isn't punishment, preparation. And when the time comes, you won't just walk into your new season. You'll walk in lighter, clearer, stronger. And you'll look back at what you had to leave behind and realize it was never a loss. It was a release. A divine repositioning for the greatness that was waiting all along. This is the secret law of new beginnings. First, the shift, then the separation, and finally the rise. That's something sacred about the act of releasing. Something heaven honors when your hands finally loosen their grip on what you've been desperately trying to hold. It's one of the most difficult things a person can do, to let go, to surrender, to stop fighting for something that once gave you identity, comfort, or connection. But there's a divine law at work here. You cannot receive what is next until you release what is no longer meant for you. So many people are asking God for a new season while still clutching the remnants of the old one. They're praying for a fresh start, a breakthrough, a blessing, but their hands are full of pain, full of fear, full of the past. And heaven waits not because God is unwilling, but because there's no room. The blessing is ready. The new door is already open. But you cannot walk through it while dragging the dead weight of what was. Letting go isn't weakness, wisdom. It's understanding that everything has a time and a purpose under heaven. That some things were beautiful once, but just because something was right for a season doesn't mean it's right for the future. The tree doesn't cling to last year's leaves. It lets them fall so that new life can rise in their place. And you too were created to evolve, to shed, to surrender. What you refuse to release begins to rot. What you hold on to too long can turn from comfort to cage. That relationship that once made you feel alive, now it drains your peace. That job that once provided security, now it suffocates your purpose. That habit you used to rely on to cope, now it keeps you from becoming, and still you hold on. Not because you love it, but because you fear what life looks like without it. But here's the truth. Every step toward your future requires the courage to say goodbye to something. Goodbye to who you thought you had to be. Goodbye to the version of yourself that survived, but was never meant to thrive. Goodbye to the voice in your head that says you'll never be more than what you've already been. Because as long as you hold on to the lie, you cannot receive the truth. And what waits on the other side of release? Freedom of rebellion. Not just the kind that breaks physical chains, but the kind that unclenches your spirit. That lets you breathe again, that allows you to say, I don't know what's next, but I know I'm finally ready for it. That's where real transformation begins. Not in the grasp, but in the release. You have to make room. And making room means being willing to feel the emptiness for a moment. That's what scares people. The in-between. The space after the letting go, but before the breakthrough. But don't let the silence make you retreat. Don't let the void convince you you've made a mistake. Because it's in that sacred space where the divine steps in. That's where grace floods in, where strength is restored, where clarity begins to replace confusion. This is the law of divine exchange. For everything you release, something greater is returned, not always immediately. Not always in the way you expect, but always in alignment with your calling. Always in harmony with the deepest purpose of your life. Release doesn't mean forgetting. It doesn't mean the past didn't matter. Because what you don't see is that the things falling apart are the very things that couldn't go with you into your next season. You prayed for purpose, for power, for breakthrough, but that comes at a price. That price is surrender. And surrender often shows up as chaos. You don't need to understand it all right now. You just need to trust that the one who allowed the shaking will also anchor you through it. There is a light coming, but first the storm. There is order coming, but first the wind and the waves. And when it's over, when the dust settles, you'll look around and realize something. You didn't break. You became. You didn't lose. It was all preparation. And you'll see that what was once chaos is now the foundation of your calling. So hold on. Stay in the process. Let the shaking do its work. Because the greater the storm, the greater the destiny on the other side. And when the light breaks through, when the morning comes, you'll understand it was never chaos at all. It was construction. And your new beginning was there all along, waiting to rise from the ashes. We mourn endings as if they're tragedies. We cry over closed doors. We grieve over what left us. We question the timing and wrestle with the pain of things slipping through our fingers. But what if I told you every ending was written with a beginning in mind? That before the heartbreak, before the failure, before the silence, your future was already written. The ending wasn't a surprise to heaven. It was part of the script. That's the mystery we often forget. God doesn't write stories the way we do. We write from beginning to end. He writes from end to beginning. Before the first tear fell, the healing was already prepared. Before the betrayal, the restoration was in motion. Before the door closed, another one had already been set to open. What felt like devastation was part of a divine orchestration. And once you see it, you'll never see endings the same way again. You were not born to live in cycles of constant loss. You were born to evolve, to transition, to be taken from glory to glory, from one level of grace to the next. And every shift, every transition, every death of a season is a sign, not of God's absence, but of his intention. When something ends in your life, it's not because you've been abandoned. It's because you've been prepared. The people who walked away, they were never meant to see the next chapter. The opportunity that slipped through your hands, it was a distraction dressed as destiny. The plan that collapsed under the weight of disappointment, it was rooted in your will, not his. And still, in all of that, he was kind. He let it fall because he knew what was ahead, because he wrote it with the end in mind. You see, when you stand in a moment of ending, you feel like everything is unraveling, but from heaven's view, it's coming together. The pain is real, yes. The confusion is valid, but beyond what your eyes can see, something greater is forming. A purpose that couldn't be fulfilled if things had stayed the same. A calling that would have been suffocated by your comfort. Sometimes the loss is necessary because it frees you from what would have kept you small. You're not being punished, you're being positioned. There's a door waiting, but you wouldn't have seen it if the one behind you hadn't shut. There's a person ahead who's meant to walk with you, but you would have never met them if the old connection didn't break. There's a version of you waiting to be born, but they can only emerge through fire. So yes, the ending hurts, but it's holy. And here's the most powerful part. God doesn't just recycle pain. He repurposes it. Nothing is wasted. Not the sleepless nights, not the tears on your pillow, not the heartbreaks, betrayals, or seasons of silence. Every moment you thought was meaningless has been recorded, woven into a destiny that you can't even imagine yet. What the enemy meant for evil, God will use for glory. This is not just a poetic hope. This is a spiritual law. All things work together, not just the good things, all things, the rejection and the acceptance, the failure and the victory, the death and the resurrection. Heaven operates from a place of full knowledge. And so when something ends, when the door closes, when the chapter turns, it's not a stop, it's a signal, a divine cue that the next act is about to begin. You may not see the full picture now, but you don't need to. You just need to trust the author. The one who's never wasted a line in your story. The one who's never written a sentence without meaning. The one who's never started anything without first seeing how it will end. So stop fearing endings. Don't resist the close of a season. Let it fall. Let it end. Let the page turn. And as you do, remind yourself of this truth. If it ended, it was meant to. If it left, it served its purpose. And if you're still here, it means your story is not done. It's just beginning, because the ending was never the point. The beginning was you failed before. You've fallen. You've been disappointed by life, by people, even by yourself. And now the thought of beginning again feels like standing at the base of a mountain after being thrown from the top. You look up and it feels impossible. The weight of your past whispers in your ear. Oh, what's the point? The enemy of your soul feeds you the lie that this is it, that your best days are behind you. But let me speak the truth to your heart. The secret is not just to begin, but to begin again. That is the law hidden in creation. Everything in this universe begins again. The sun doesn't stop because yesterday was cloudy, it rises again. The trees don't give up after a harsh winter. They bloom again. The tides return, the stars shine, the winds shift, and you too were created with that same divine rhythm. You were made to rise again. The world glorifies perfection. It rewards those who get it right the first time. But heaven celebrates those who dare to rise after being broken. Who dare to trust again, love again, believe again, even after life gave them every reason not to. There is a strength greater than muscle. It's the strength to restart, to rebuild when everything has been taken, to believe that ashes can still become beauty. This is not just motivation. It's a spiritual law. God does not cancel your purpose because of failure. He multiplies it through your restoration. Think of the greatest stories ever written. They all include a moment of failure. Moses murdered a man and fled. David fell into sin and shame. Peter denied the very one he swore to follow. But none of those failures stopped the story. They became the turning point. The very failure the enemy tried to use to bury them, God used to build them. You think you've fallen too far? You haven't. You think you've made too many mistakes? You haven't. As long as there is breath in your lungs, your story still carries divine potential. Heaven isn't looking for flawless people. It's looking for surrendered hearts. People who are willing to say, I don't feel ready, I don't feel worthy, but I'm still willing to start again. Because when you begin again, you align yourself with resurrection power. The same power that raised Christ from the dead now stirs within you, not just to inspire, but to resurrect dreams that have been buried in doubt, to resurrect identity that has been buried in shame, to resurrect purpose that has been buried under fear, failure, and fatigue. But here's the truth. Beginning again isn't easy. It takes more courage to rise the second time than it ever did the first. The wounds are still fresh. The memories still sting. But that is where your strength is born. Not in having a perfect path, but in having a persistent spirit. One that says, even if I lost everything, I can rebuild. Even if I was knocked down, I will not stay down. Even if they left, even if it ended, even if it broke, I will begin again. And when you do, something sacred happens. Heaven responds, grace meets you on the road of return. Provision starts to find you. Destiny realigns itself with your new direction. And what you build this time will be stronger, purer, and more anointed than what came before, because now you're building with wisdom. Now you're moving with experience. Now you've tasted pain, and instead of being destroyed by it, you've been refined through it. Do not despise your past. Don't waste your energy trying to undo it. Use it. Let it become the soil where something new and holy grows. The second chapter isn't second best. It's often the real beginning. The one born from truth, not pressure. The one rooted in authenticity, not appearance. So take the first step, even if your knees shake. Whisper the prayer, even if your voice cracks. Trust again, even if your heart is still tender, because this is the secret law of new beginnings. Not just that we're allowed to start again, but that we're called to, empowered to, anointed to, anointed to. And this time, you're not starting from scratch. You're starting from strength.